From making you stink to making you croak. This video is about deuterium. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name's Emmanuel Arbeni. I've helped over 100 men and women work their way towards optimal health using nature. And I've been asked by some of you here to talk about deuterium and to break it down the way I see it. And I just finished reading the book called Deuterium Depletion by Gabor Somlyai. That's this book. And there's a lot of great information in there. But I want to say before I get started is that there's a lot of missing information in that book. There are so many details on the cases that they followed on the cancer patients that use deuterium depleted water, which we don't have. So many details. And there's some recommendations about deuterium depletion, for example, about saunas and thermal baths, that is based on one incident in the book where there is no data, I should say, shared about anything else around the situation. So I think it's really premature to say anything about that. But there's some absolutely amazing information in there. And I wanted to read it to kind of get a full picture. So the first thing I'm going to walk through in the video is first, I'm going to talk about a few things that I noticed when it comes to deuterium and deuterium depletion. And I'm going to talk about vortices, oscillations, and vibrations in your mitochondria and cohesive domains in the water as it relates to deuterium, like really briefly. This is not, if you're new to my channel, I'm not going to get into super scientific detail. I'm kind of explaining things to you the way I see them. So, deuterium, first of all, makes you stinky. So, when somebody has sweat that is really smelly, or someone who doesn't sweat enough or sweats excessively, because sweating is part of your mitochondrial function, and your mitochondria require a certain um like percentage of deuterium depleted water to be in there to work properly, then your sweat being excessively stinky is a deuterium problem, and you sweating excessively and not sweating enough is related to deuterium because it's got to do with how your mitochondria work. So first of all, you are meant to have deuterium in your blood. Your blood vessels, right, are filled with red blood cells, and you're meant to have high deuterium in your blood. We know this based on testing. And when ultraviolet light hits your skin unobstructed, it causes a release of nitric oxide and all of this downstream effect, which, again, not technically accurate here, squeezes the blood in your red blood cells to emit light, like a deuterium arc lamp. You can Google deuterium arc lamp. But basically, it's making light because the ultraviolet light is making kind of like it's squeezing it. So you're supposed to have deuterium in your blood. Now, how does your body keep deuterium in your blood and out of certain things? Well, there's some really interesting things that happen. One, most of us, and even I, did not realize that the blood, when it moves in your body, doesn't go like this. It goes like this, which I didn't know, but it's actually like in all the papers and stuff like that, the blood moves as a vortex. So that's one way in which it keeps deuterium out of areas where deuterium isn't supposed to be, such as your mitochondria. And that's a vortex, basically. It's creating a vortex in your blood. And the force of the vortex in your blood has to do with factors such as magnetic fields, because everything that spins creates a magnetic field, whether it's a direct magnetic field or a pulsating magnetic field, like, you know, uh, electricity and artificial sources of non-native electromagnetic fields. It's anything that spins creates a magnetic field. So it's spinning, it's creating a magnetic field, and then it also correlates with the magnetic field that you sense in order to push that spin to keep going. There's obviously other factors to this as well, but just to keep it simple. Now, your mitochondria does two things. It both vibrates and it oscillates at specific frequencies. And one of these only happens when you sleep because your body must be paralyzed in order for it to happen. This is just a cool side note. But that aside, the specific frequency of vibrations and oscillations, because it's actually noted in the book, um, deuterium depletion, about the frequencies and how deuterium changes the frequency of water, which I thought it was a really cool note in there. Like, again, some really great gems in there. And these oscillations and vibrations in your mitochondria, I wanted to get some extra light in here. It's getting dark in this room. Okay. So the water vibrates at a certain frequency. And if this frequency will change with deuterium. And the change of this frequency disturbs this delicate balance of keeping the deuterium where it needs to be and out of the mitochondria. And once this is disturbed, and it can be disturbed by multiple factors, it can be disturbed by non-native EMFs. It's particularly disturbed by 5G and the higher, not just 5G, but the higher, like, fifth generation LTE wavelengths of wireless technology that are around today, like the higher wavelengths, the millimeter technology. These things disturb the oscillations and vibrations of your mitochondria to a greater degree, not just because of how they collapse the way water works, but because they actually affect, the way that the frequency of your mitochondria. And that's a really big issue with then allowing deuterium to enter into the mitochondria where it's not supposed to be. And deuterium is excluded in the organization of water into cohesive domains. So when water organizes itself in like positively charged, negatively charged particles, it excludes deuterium, just like it excludes other heavier particles, which means that it doesn't want it. But then the more deuterium there is in there, the less it can actually organize its own molecules to hold a charge and to activate all these special properties of water. Okay, the other thing that's really important to consider or to think about is that you have this whole lattice lock situation. And what does that really mean? So, in your inner mitochondrial membrane, you have opposing charges that create a gradient. This is how you get that 30 million volt charge that you've probably heard reference 1,000 times if you've been in this, quantum biology space. So to simplify it for people who are new to this space, like brand new, your mitochondria hold a charge that's equivalent to a bolt of lightning. This powers everything. Without enough of this charge, you can't do anything that you need to do to stay in life. And basically, anywhere in your body where this charge or this power drops, you get a problem. An easy kind of way to prove this to yourself to make it sense in your mind is think of like when someone gets an EEG or an ECG to measuring electrical potentials. That's because your body makes electricity, and in your mitochondria you make a ton of electricity. Now, this 30 volt charge is insulated by deuterium depleted water. So you have, in order to make electricity, you need a gradient, positive, negative charge, like opposing charges. And then between this gradient is deuterium depleted water. But because it must be deuterium depleted, that means these hydrogen molecules, right? Water, H2O, that's hydrogen, but it needs to be hydrogen, not D2O or deuterium, because deuterium is much larger and heavier and makes a bond, like any chemical bond that forms, twice as strong and much more difficult to break. So if you in your mitochondria you have this gradient must be insulated with like thin water, like light water basically. And then imagine like this gradient, and you have like positive negative charges, and think of them as like a lattice. And this is how I see it. And then the more large particles you have in there, instead of having this fluid lattice of negative and positive charges that flow against each other that make this huge volt charge that's insulated by this water, instead you have large particles studded in there, and now the movement between them to create that charge begins to lock. And the more large, heavy particles you have in there, the less movement there is. And the less movement is, the more that locks. And if that locks completely, well, you're screwed. Um, so that's the other thing with deuterium. And the other really important consideration is that a lot of people that don't understand deuterium and haven't looked into it will say that, hey, it doesn't matter if you take a supplement because look at the difference and the tiny fraction of increased deuterium that you'll get from taking a supplement over just, eating normal non-processed food, which is not, super high in deuterium. But with deuterium, and what Gabor Somlyai mentioned in his book, is that research shows that even a 1 parts per million decrease in deuterium slows tumor growth. Obviously, this is petri dish studies, which means deuterium depleted water in direct contact with the cells. But if you think of your mitochondria that way, right, even a 1 parts per million decrease in deuterium makes a huge impact. And then what they also found is a decrease in 5 parts per million twice within 8 hours, completely stopped tumor growth in a petri dish. So, direct contact of deuterium depleted water with the cells, which brings to the point the reason why such small differences in deuterium make such a big difference. If you're taking a bunch of supplements, you are adding that deuterium and it adds quickly. Obviously, if you're eating processed food and garbage, you're not going to be better off either way because both ways you're getting a high level of deuterium because deuterium laden water or water higher in deuterium than normal is used in the processing of foods and supplements in order to extend their shelf life. Because remember, double the bond strength for deuterium. What does that mean? That means that your vitamin C supplement won't degrade as fast. It means your NAC supplement won't turn useless as fast. It means that shelf life can be extended. And that's how we know that this is the case. Now, I will say that I want to make a couple of notes of the book because I find what is puzzling to me is that a lot of people will go and read a book and then they treat the book as gospel. They'll be like, oh my gosh, well, Gabor Somlyai says X and X and X, but like read the book critically, right? This is not about like me being right and him being wrong or whatever. This is just like read it critically and take into consideration his expertise, his own silo, his own isolated region of knowledge, which also he doesn't necessarily claim to be an expert in all of these other things, right? So taking that into consideration and taking into consideration the limited amount of information that he has. So, for example, Gabor Somlyai recommends that you only drink deuterium depleted water as your water, and you don't drink any other water to reduce the amount of deuterium that you're taking in from regular water. Now, this doesn't make sense because then you're losing out on hydration and you're losing out on the potential to further decrease deuterium with the water that you're drinking, which you can do by adding salt. The other thing that he notes in there, which is very fascinating, is that the sodium pump channel and how he mentions that affects deuterium depletion. And this is the reason why your other water, you want it to be obviously not super heavy in deuterium, but you want it to be carbonated, which is going to help with the process. And you want it to be with salt, sea salt, a high mineral sea salt, and with a lime or lemon juice in there, again, to help with the process of depleting deuterium. There's so many things that you can do and add to your water to take advantage of both sides. You can have your deuterium depletion and you can still hydrate enough because both of them are really important. And there's much better ways to ensure that you're not adding excess deuterium, such as following a seasonal diet, avoiding foods in the tropics when you are in, outside of the tropics, or avoiding high deuterium foods even while you're in the tropics so you can deplete deuterium faster. not drinking pop, not eating processed foods, watching things that are packaged. There's 100 things you could do to avoid adding that extra deuterium that doesn't involve like, you know, depleting yourself of the water that you need. Pun not intended. It's the first word that came to mind. But this is the thing. And this is the reason why there's like a lot of critical thinking that has to go every time you read, observe information, and then figure out how to apply it to yourself. And deuterium, too much deuterium, because deuterium is a heavy molecule, because nature prefers light versions of molecules compared to heavy versions. Actually, interesting side note, I recently discovered that one way in which high quality essential oil companies determine whether or not the product is genuine is by actually testing it for deuterium and for heavy isotopes, because there is a specific pattern of light isotopes that is preferred by nature. And when you add an artificial or synthetic substance in, you increase the amount of heavy isotopes. So, this is why, like, nature prefers light isotopes, like in general of things. So, anything created in a lab, or think of like a supplement, like a synthetic supplement, is going to have higher heavy isotopes than a natural one. And an isotope, just to re-clarify that, like hydrogen, deuterium, and protium. So light hydrogen versus heavy hydrogen, those are two different isotopes. That's what that means. So you want to deplete your deuterium any way you can, because in general, you are likely going to be really high in deuterium. It's really hard to have it any other way in our modern world. If you haven't checked out my video on I ditched all my supplements for DDW, I did link it to the end screen, but that's a great video to watch next if you haven't seen it, because I kind of go over all of the crazy things that happened to me when depleting deuterium. The last note I'm going to put here before I end is that he does make a really good point in emphasizing the side effects, meaning the unpleasant effects of depleting deuterium. And this I've heard happen not just with DDW, but also with carbonated water or mastic gum, or vibration plates, where you are depleting deuterium, you're loosening these heavy molecules, and you're eliminating them, and as a process of doing so, you begin to feel really terrible, crappy, sick, phlegm, um, you know, exhausted, whatever, for a certain period of time before you feel much better. So that is 100% normal. And I talk about that as well in that video. So if you haven't seen that video that I've linked, that I ditched all my supplements for DDW, I highly recommend you check that out next.